Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine. Barry Burton. Rebecca Chambers. Albert Wesker. Biohazard.
Hello everyone, welcome to Sega Saturn SHIRO, the only podcast that will give you a spook. My name is Patrick, and today we'll be discussing our top 5 Saturn Halloween/scary games. Please welcome our SHIROs for tonight, Kay, Peter, Chaz, myself, and Sam I Am himself, the Southern Sega Gentleman.
What's up, boys and girls?
It's already going downhill, and we haven't even started yet.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Chaz. Happy birthday to you.
Chaz.
That was perfect.
Gotcha. Well,
you mean that my mic was not working for that entire thing? That's great.
Yeah, that made it even better.
Awkward. I was supposed to have Sam say something. I was expecting him to be like, Sam, why can't you play along when I want you to?
Because, man, you just go in all kinds of like circles and stuff. You know what? You're about like that chicken out up in the rain, mouth open, just drowning. I love you for it, though, brother.
All right, hey, so why don't we jump right into the news tonight? Of course, as you guys know from me posting about it constantly and talking about it, Datadisc has started shipping the Police Knots records. So those of you that don't know, Police Knots is of course, a Hideo Kojima game that originally came out on the PC-98 and was eventually ported to all different systems, including our very own Sega Saturn. And Datadisc recently put a remastered vinyl cut of it, which has the entire soundtrack on 2 different vinyl discs. Came in 3 different colors. So were you guys able to pick up the soundtrack, or was I the only one that bought it on vinyl?
I didn't have the funds at the time, so I was not able to put my money down to get a copy of it.
I don't know. You've kind of got me excited for it. I might see if I can get in on the action.
I actually was able to get an order in. Lucky for me, I was able to pre-order before it sold out. The limited edition splatter ones were sold out in like seconds. Actually, not seconds, probably minutes. And they've confirmed that they're doing represses of it, however, as all 3 versions sold out. So both Opaque White, Classic Black, and the Black and White Swirl. I believe there's still some on Mondo Records, I believe, that have them in stock. And they confirmed that there would be a repress. So those of you that want to pick it up, I would definitely snag it up before it goes. You might get snatched away. Ha ha ha.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, so Patrick, have you listened to the official soundtrack already?
It sounds a lot better on my setup, my vinyl setup, compared to my MP3 setup and my music setup. It actually sounds really good. I, of course, played the Classic Black vinyl. I kept the Black and White Special Edition sealed, as I'm a giant nerd, and I don't usually do that with records, but it's Police Knots, so I'm in love with the game. I have like 25 different versions of that, but I think Chaz might have me beat, though.
I'm curious about the comparison because when I was assembling the repros a couple of years ago, I had to piece together the soundtrack that ended up coming with it. So I'm curious as to what tracks made it versus what didn't.
So everything that shows up in the game, the bonus ones that were in Karen Hojo's room, there's a bunch of CDs, and none of those made it for the most part. It was all the main soundtrack. So the do theme, the opening theme, I know for a fact, the police stations, all the shooting scenes, so everything in that regards made it that's in the game, but the only thing that didn't was that music library, which is kind of a bummer. It has some remixes of like snatcher tracks, like it has One Night in Neo Kobe City, which I thought was pretty good synthed up. And it sounds pretty good. Chaz thinks it sounds really good, right, Chaz? It sounds really nice and clear for you?
I actually haven't heard it yet.
If I could make a recommendation, I would definitely get the black and the clear vinyl record. As I think the swirl, I always have issues with multicolored vinyls and vinyls in general, so I would recommend pick up the classic black, in my opinion, or the classic white.
I would absolutely love to get that, but the problem is I just dropped like $50 on PAL Resident Evil for the Sega Saturn so that I can pretty much finish my variants of the original Resident Evil. Minus, I still need a North American long box. I've got the game, I just don't have the long box and artwork and everything. But besides that, and the $40 I just dropped on an original PS2 copy of Silent Hill 3, I would love to. But I think I'm just going to jive with that sweet OST that Mr. K got a hold of me in that nice little Police Nights reproduction I got. So that's a little shout out there.
Great sounding soundtrack, K. I jam it in my car every day. That's not a joke either. It's literally in my car right now.
Thanks, guys. You're so sweet.
No problem. We just need to put pressure on you. Hopefully you're feeling good. Speaking of data discs, they also recently announced that the Thunder Force 4 soundtrack is going to be put on vinyl as well. It's going to be their next release, and from what I understand, I believe it's going to use... I'm kind of unclear if it's going to use the PC Engine or the Saturn soundtrack, but either way, that game's going to be put on vinyl, and I'm kind of excited to see what they do with it. Because the Police Knots one actually had like a giant art book with it and a bunch of extras, so I'm hoping they do the same for Thunder Force. But that's definitely a buy for me, because I love shmup soundtracks. Moving on to news with Professor Brace of Saturnator. I think it was Saturnator. Essentially, he announced that the betas are in the works. He basically just got a shipment in from China of the actual boards, but unfortunately the edges that he's going to be using for the beta tests are unbeveled, so as a lot of you know, the unbeveled edges will cause issues in the Saturn as it bends the pens and it doesn't really play nice and sits right in the Saturn, or just anything in general, and beveled edges are sort of the needed thing. So on the cartridge slot, there's I don't know, you see the entry point for the cartridge. Usually you'll see like a very teensy bitsy beveled edge on it, and I think maybe Kay might know a little bit about that too, where if it's not beveled, it causes havoc with the Saturn's pins. Or I don't know if any of you guys experience that as well with the most notorious Saturn carts that are out there, the third-party ones that don't have the beveled edges and cause damage on that cartridge slot.
Dude, I'm gonna tell you, I've never had a problem personally with the one. You know, I've always, me and Brian from Titancast, we did one of our very first casts was talking about peripherals and how to expand your Saturn library, basically talking about backups, reproductions, etc. And, you know, the pseudo Saturn card or the action replay card for bringing in imports and everything. And I was very clear about not constantly taking it out and putting it back in. I personally have never had a problem with that, but I have heard so many horror stories about aftermarket carts. My one real experience, though, and this kind of goes with it, is the failure rate with action replay carts I've had. I have had so many of them, like region bypass, no problem. Cheat codes, no problem. You want that 1 megabyte, 4 megabyte? Nah, we're not doing it, brother.
You know, I had the same issue.
The action replay carts are not 1 meg. They're only 4 meg.
So how do they work with 1 meg games then?
Because the memory addressed by those games, it occupies the same amount of space. So when the game is coded correctly, it can address that memory. But when the game is not coded correctly, it addresses the memory in a different way. And that's why you have some of those games that are not compatible with those carts.
Is that one of the reasons why you also have those garbled graphics if you leave the Saturn on for a long period of time?
That's exactly why, yeah.
Well, now I know.
There's actually a cart out there, like a Chinese cart that came out in the last few months that has a switch on the top. And there was an older one that I picked up many years ago that had a switch on the front. And it actually cuts off the extra 3 megs of RAM. So that kind of cart does function as a proper 1 meg or 4 meg with the switch. But anything that doesn't have a switch is not going to be a proper 1 and 4 meg cart.
Well, my kind of go-to thing is at this point, and I killed one of my Saturn boards lately whenever I tried to modify it with I've done it 3 times. Of course, the 4th time would be the charm, or the 2 times and the 3rd time would be the charm, whatever the case is. I killed one of my boards, put in a region bypass or region-free, universal, whatever you want to call it. But I killed it because 2 of my Saturns are dead right now, and I've only got 1 Saturn that's, I had 2, but now I've only got 1. And I wanted to have one that was, again, region-free, as well as having a Phantom. That way I could, play whatever. It didn't matter, and I could use my original 1 megabyte, my original 4 megabyte, and my original, memory card. And right now I'm stuck at having to use an action replay again. I hate it because I like games like Panzer Dragoon Saga, for instance. You can't even boot the game in with that thing in.
You can. I mean, there are workarounds we can talk about, but it's particularly like you need to use a cheat code if you're going to do like a non-pseudo version. And if you're going to do a pseudo version, you got to make sure you're using like Cafe Alpha's pseudo Saturn Kai and a proper dump of the game.
I'm no pseudo Saturn adopter though. I stick with my Phantoms and my Universals.
I'm gonna call you Danny Phantom from now on. That's gonna be canon.
Roll with it, baby. I'm cool with it.
Damn,
Yeah,
cool with everything.
You can throw in a cheat code on your action replay and bypass that lockout.
The Saturnator basically doesn't have an ETA yet, but he's estimating probably sometime next year for some pre-order, some release. So he's just working right now, make sure it's 100% good and it's easily manufactured and shippable, so that way he can get them out in a steady stream of availability. Alright, so that pretty much does it for the news. Why don't we move on to our main topic, which is the spooky Saturn games, or Halloween-themed Saturn games. Just really, I guess the criteria really, in my opinion, was just any games that were Halloween-themed, or had some Halloween theme to it, or were very scary, very scurry.
Now, those of you guys who've been listening to us know that Pat, Dave, and myself have done this last year, and we kind of went over a smorgasbord of games, but didn't really go too deep into much of our personal favorites. And we talked a little bit about them and gave them some ratings. But since we have so many new SHIROs, and Sam here is our guest, figured we want to hear about what their favorites were.
Definitely. All right. Why don't we start off with the first game on our list, which is, of course,
Resident Evil.
The triggering system has now been activated. All researchers and guards should take cover immediately. Unlock all rooms for evacuation.
I guess basically for everyone that really doesn't know about the series, it started off as a, I guess...
What rock are you hiding under?
Yeah, I'm with Kay. I'm not going to explain anymore, no. For everyone that lives under a rock and doesn't know what the series is, it's a game that really pretty much not created, but really perfected the survival horror genre in terms of security camera angles and that sort of aesthetic gameplay. So basically a game released in 1996, of course on the PlayStation 1 first and then the Saturn. And it basically was the, I guess, a spiritual successor to the Sweet Home game on the NES, which is I think it was like Shinji Mikami. Was he the one that did the first one?
He is. He was the one that did the first one.
I gotcha. So Shinji Mikami worked on the first one. He had some experience with Sweet Home, and he wanted to create that vibe on the PS1. So he was inspired and made the Resident Evil series, which of course is now world-renowned, and now the remake for 2 is actually coming out next year, which I'm really excited for, and I'm pretty sure everyone in this chat that liked Resident Evil is excited for it as well. Alright, so why don't we get your guys' thoughts on it? So why don't we start with you, Chaz? What are your thoughts on Resident Evil, Mr. Speedrun Man?
Well, I'm no world record holder, but I'll take the compliment all the same. So my start with Resident Evil began on the PS1 back in 97 when I was maybe 11, 12 years old. I actually heard very little about it. I only saw some gameplay of it at a video game store, and it looked intriguing to me, so I rented it one day, back when we used to rent video games from rental stores, and just like millions of others, fell in love with it, and played it, and got better and better and better at it. And then many years later, I finally got around to playing the Saturn version, which most had not played. And overall, my overall opinion of it is that it was a relatively solid port for the Saturn for what it was. Although I still personally prefer the PlayStation 1 version. For me personally, it feels smoother. It feels better in my hands. But I do like the more color palette on the Saturn, which makes the game look a little bit darker, which for a survival horror game is very appropriate.
Yeah, I noticed that as well on the Saturn. It kind of doesn't have that, sort of missing that PS1 jagged vibe to it. I don't know if maybe that was just me, but it seemed kind of a lot sharper on the Saturn.
Yeah, the colors are more somber on the Saturn than they are on the PlayStation, where on the PS1 they appear to be more brighter. So the overall darker image, in my opinion, actually helped make the game a little scarier. And also the load times, which are a little bit longer going through one door to the other, actually kind of upped the fear factor for me, because even though I knew what was going to happen, there was a little bit of delay there, moving from one room to the next.
It's like a dramatic pause.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of it being a nuisance, it actually was kind of an asset.
It's kind of interesting you thought that way. I heard a lot of people that said the exact opposite, where they thought it was annoying, but I kind of like the fact that you saw it from an angle where there's like a dramatic pause, like a hold your breath moment, go through the door.
Yeah,
like
I mean, I get the frustration that other players had, but for me, I looked the other way. So it was beneficial for me.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. I mean, when I played that game, I thought the same thing. It's like, all right, I'm like in the mentality of the characters where it's like you're grabbing the door. All right, here we go. What am I going to see next?
Waits just a little, but it just takes a little bit longer to get that door open, which I can imagine is the seek time on the Saturn itself, trying to get the data off the disk to load the next room, but because it took a little longer, it made it a little more suspenseful.
Nice. One of the questions I had for you is, I know you speedrun this game, or at least not world record speedrun, but you speedrun it quite a few times. And I'm curious, what is your thought process going through it? Do you have a method for trying to get through it? Is there timings you got down, or like techniques to get through it without dying once?
I do. I have a lot of techniques that I taught myself and ones that I saw from other people running the game. I notice a lot of people who go for a world record, they never pick up the shotgun, where when I run with Jill, I never use the handgun, not even once. I throw it in the trunk and you never see it again, for starters. And then there's that bizarre maneuvering that I did when I was fighting Yon, the giant snake. That technique I found on my own, just out of boredom or just out of experimenting when I was playing the game as a kid.
Yeah, I'll have to use that.
I waited at the back of the attic, let the snake come around to try to get me. When the snake finally curls around on the other side, I run inside of him. I mean, I get blocked for a moment, but I get out of there scathe-free.
Nice. What's your recommendations for avoiding the zombies? Because that's my biggest issue. Is I just like conserving my ammo a lot, and my strategy at first was shooting them and knifing them when they're down, but it kind of didn't work as well as I thought it would.
Well, an up-close shot with the shotgun is an instant decap. That's an instant head blow-off with just one shot, if you really can't run around them. It's fast, it's convenient, and it's just one hit when you're close enough. Getting around them, that all depends on the zombie itself and its position. Because if you can get behind their back and then run past them, they won't be fast enough to turn around and grab you. You'll zip right by them. However, if you try to run by them when they're facing you or at the right angle to grab you, they will lock onto you. No, there's no getting around that. But there are some zombies that will try to throw up on you instead of grabbing you, like the ones in the hallway on the second floor, just past where the overhead dining room area is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. That's the first place you enter, right? Or is that somewhere else?
It's on the second. It's a stairwell. It's on the second floor. It's dimly lit. The lighting kind of looks like a sunset glow. You know what I mean?
I think so. You said it was a dining room?
No, it's on the second floor, and it's one room past the balcony of the dining room.
I gotcha. Yeah, I kind of get an idea with that.
In that hallway, when you run through there, the zombies will always try to throw up on you first before trying to bite you. You run right by, they never get you.
Oh wow, I didn't even notice that. So they'll always throw up on you?
They will always try to throw up on you first. You just run right by, they don't have a chance. You move too fast for them for the throw up to hit you, because it's a slower attack than an instant grab.
I gotcha. And that's 100% of the time, or only when you first enter the room?
That is every time you enter. I believe
Awesome.
After they throw up or try to throw up on you, they will try to grab you afterwards, but by that time you're long gone.
Yeah, I know what he's talking about now, Sam. I know where that room is. That'll definitely come in handy for my next playthrough.
Yeah, if you can get them on their side, or if you can get them on the back, or get them around from the back, you can zip right by them.
My experience with Resident Evil, as I played it on the N64, I played Resident Evil 2. That was the first Resident Evil game I've ever played. I never had a PS1 growing up. I only had an N64. So every time I'd want to play Resident Evil 2, it was always on the N64 with a weird low-res soundtrack, the low-res graphics, but I really enjoyed it. I would always ask my grandma after she picked me up from school to go and rent it.
Yeah,
so
I actually still want to get a copy of the 64 version, but the only gripe with that I've heard is that the menu apparently is in 480i while the gameplay is 240p. Yeah, so if I play that game through the Meister, I'm just going to get constant black screens. I'm better off with the CRT.
It looks better on the CRT anyways. It's pretty awful looking on the Frame Meister in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's coming from somebody that's like N64 bad, so knowing that, it's like twice as bad.
Oh yeah, ugh.
It's yucca pucka, but yeah, that was the first one I played. The first Resident Evil 1 version I played was actually on the GameCube with the remake, but I went back to the original, and I know this might sound controversial, but I really like the PS1 a lot better, and I ended up playing the Saturn a little bit later, And I really, really enjoy the Saturn version a lot more than the PS1 version, in my opinion. Just as all those bonus features, but yeah, I'm really excited to play it eventually, though, and beat it 100%.
I always went for the best ending when you say 100%.
Yeah, I'm going to try to aim for that, too. But Peter, what do you think about it? What were your experiences with Resident Evil?
Well, yeah, okay, so I've got a bit of a confession. I've not really finished Resident Evil. In fact, I haven't really gotten very far at all. So, so I'm the guy that, lives under the rock, who hasn't even played any other Resident Evil game. So I guess I'm just going to pose a few questions out there. So for players like me that haven't played through it and that don't really have, long stretches of time to play games, how should I approach Resident Evil? Because I know that, you can't really save at will, can you? You have, from what I understand, you use ribbons to save, and there's only so many of them. So yeah, what would you recommend for a player like me that's, first of all, never played it, and second of all, can't really do gaming in any more than, relatively short bursts?
I think you should consult Sam on that. He is probably your go-to on time management and Resident Evil, so take it away, Sam.
Whenever you're going to play Resident Evil, especially the first one, especially on the Saturn, what you need to do is you need to absolutely forget about saving the first couple times you play, and you just need to go balls to the walls. I say that because Resident Evil was the very first Saturn game I ever owned. Okay, it was the very first new game I ever owned, period.
Not a bad start.
No, not at all. It was October 4th of 1997 was the day I bought it. It was the same day I got my used Saturn. Now, whenever it comes to Resident Evil specifically, there are numerous ways to speed run it. You can go for best ending, you can go for worst ending. I mean, there's numerous endings besides just best and worst. But if you're new to the genre, if you're new to Resident Evil itself, especially the original, I mean, me and Chaz can both tell you there's a lot of things that are wrong with Resident Evil, gameplay wise, from an intuitive standpoint. It doesn't seem to be the correct way to do things if you come from platformers or even first-person shooters during that period of time. It's just it makes you think about things, and the item inventory management really screws with you if you're not knowing what's coming ahead, because you'll be doing a lot of backtracking. The first time I ever beat the game, it took me the better part of 3.5-4 hours to beat it. And that was a playthrough. In fact, the first night I had that game, I literally sat there trying to fight Yawn all night and continuously dying over and over and over and over. And I wasn't ever saving my game, so I had to keep starting over. But best thing to do, honestly, is go in and just play with the mechanics. Try to find out where stuff is, because that's the only way you beat that game quickly. That's the only reason I can run those knife only, like what Chaz was talking about. I know how the enemies react. In fact, I learned something from Chaz. He taught me about what the hunters do, how they attack. They're left-handed. I never thought about that. And then in a subsequent playthrough after he told me that, I noticed that it was a hell of a lot easier to dodge them whenever I was going for the opposite side. Whenever I was tackling it from the perspective thinking, well, they're left-handed. So you can always learn new things. I mean, this is a 20-plus-year-old game, and we're still learning stuff about it. And it's just the nature of how the game plays, how item placement is, how you have to plan it out. I mean, for a long time, there was, like what Chaz was talking about with the picking up the shotgun. That was, whenever it came to speed running, the way to speed run back in the early 2000s was straight up with Jill. No one messed with Chris. And every single time you went for the shotgun. And I've seen people, just like what Chaz has talked about, how he plays now. They've thrown the script on it. I see people that can beat the game quicker with Chris now than they can beat it with Jill. And the main reason that that's a factor is because Chris is the hard mode. You have less inventory slots, so you have to make more trips to the inventory boxes. But still, if you know how to do it, I mean, I've seen people literally run entire segments of the game without even having a weapon on them. Or if they do have a weapon on them, they literally just got the shotgun with the rounds in it. They don't have any extra ammunition. They'll have a first aid spray or whatever the case is, but they're very limited in what they bring with them. And that's kind of the only way you can run that game quickly, is to know, I'm going to need this. This might happen. I might need a first aid spray. I'm going to need this many rounds to take care of it. And I'm like Chaz, I'm ditching the pistol as quick as I possibly can. But, it's trial and error, dude. It's going to suck your first couple of times. You're going to be pissed off at it, but you just got to keep playing it.
Well, you know what? Okay, so I'm going to try and give it a go on Halloween, and I'm going to isolate. I'm not going to look at any YouTube videos. I'm not going to read any strategies. I'm just going to give it a go, because I'm going to be coming in with zero expectations aside from just the super general stuff that everybody knows about it. And we'll see how it goes. I'll give it a go. We'll give it a go.
Gotcha. I mean, personally, if you're really to run it, I know for a fact people recommend playing the remake. And I know that's going to be anti-Saturn, but I kind of would recommend playing the remake over the first one, just because I think it's the same game, but I think it's a lot more cleaner, the mechanics are a little bit better, in my opinion, and I like playing it a lot better. But
to me, the remake is how to remake a game. It's just that phenomenal.
Are you guys talking about Resident Evil 0 on GameCube?
No, there's the remake
Resident Evil
of
1
the first
on
one.
GameCube. The remake of the first one. It is just fantastic.
You don't have to play it. You don't have to play it on the GameCube though. It's had so many remasters. You can play it on PS4. You can play it on Xbox One. You can play it on PC. You can play it on PS3. You can play it on just about every platform.
You play it on your smartphone.
But
why would you want to do that?
to kind of go back to what Patrick said though, and I agree that Resident Evil Remake is an amazing game. I absolutely love it. But Resident Evil Remake is not Resident Evil. It is, the story's been swapped up. Positions have been swapped up. The mansion has been expanded. In a lot of respects, it's a very different game.
Right. Mechanic-wise, it's not going to play like the original did. The hitboxes are different. The computer behavior is different.
Anybody have any closing statements before we move on to the next game?
Real quick. When they were first making the first game, Shinji Mikami was not originally involved. They brought him in to work on the game because Mikami understood what was scary, but Mikami didn't want to work on the game at first because he hated being scared.
Wow.
How ironic.
Yeah, funny, huh?
Yeah, that dude straight up hated horror games.
Yeah, he made some of the best, even like or Evil Within. Want to move on to our next game on the list, which is, of course,
The House of the Dead.
Alright, so let's move on to our next game, which is going to be House of the Dead on the Sega Saturn. Originally came out on the Model 2 in 1996 in arcade. And the game was a light gun game where you play as...
You play as Ronald Reagan.
Reagan, yes. Rogan. You play as Rogan and G, two agents of the EMS trying to stop this guy from creating these zombies and taking over the world. You know, the plot wasn't really clear on that. I didn't know what his motivations was. I don't think his name was Goldman as well, right? It was...
Curian,
yeah. So Dr. Curian. And yeah, it came out on the Saturn a couple of years later in 98, and unfortunately it wasn't the best, with very not-so-great graphics and very laggy and a lot of issues playing it.
Yeah,
so,
we talked last year at length about House of the Dead, because I think it was my pick for most thematic Halloween game, out of all the options that we had gone through. This was a technical struggle for a lot of people, and I think my takeaway from it was that as rough as it looked, and it didn't look anywhere near as pretty as the arcade one did, but I still thought it was actually pretty fantastic and true to the arcade in play feel as opposed to look.
I definitely agree, Kay. I actually found the lag to make it a lot more funnier playing it, where it's like, especially on I think it was the third boss with the bat guy, where it was just going insane, where it was just lagging completely. It was hilarious. And it's still one of my favorite Saturn games, despite all its technical issues. So I guess I'd like to open the floor, see what you guys thought of it.
Well, to be honest with you, I have to make a confession in this. Yes, I've played House of the Dead numerous times, and House of the Dead 2, both of which I've played in the arcade. And to be honest with you, I've played more of them in the arcade. I wasn't a huge light gun dude. I really wasn't huge in light gun games. I was more into RPGs. I was more into action adventure, or even first-person shooters, especially during the late 90s. I just really didn't partake so much in games like House of the Dead. I loved them in the arcades. I loved grabbing that gun. I mean, hell, Gunblade New York are my all-time favorite, arcade games. And I really enjoyed it there, but it was never really, I know everybody puts it as a horror game, but to me, it never really was like a horror game. It was just this really weird, light gun game that there was monsters and crap like that. And I mean, yeah, I could see why it's a horror game for some people, but I don't know. It never really struck me as that. It was like the Aliens versus Predator arcade game is the same way. It kind of felt that way to me. It's just point and click and shoot and kill everything big enough to die. That's basically what my mindset was. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And I think I didn't play it on the Saturn until probably the early 2000s. I didn't have a copy of it myself. I didn't even have a stunner, until the early 2000s. I don't know. I'm not really going to be able to give much into it because it's not one of my huge favorite games. I mean, to be honest with you, my buddy AJ from Mastercast TV, Andrew Rosa, he could talk for hours on hours about House of the Dead probably, but for me personally, it's just another light gun game. It's a cool game, but it's for me, it's in the arcade, and I was never really big into the arcade at home, so that's me.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Sam. I really played most of House of the Dead in the arcades, and I actually didn't know it had a Saturn port at all until years later, which is the reason why I got the Saturn. That and Virtual On, because I really wanted to play those arcade games without trying to hunt down an arcade somewhere that had them. I definitely agree. I got a lot more arcade play, but now that I have Saturn play, I don't have to go to the arcade anymore. Okay, maybe I have to do a little bit if I want to play it competently, but you guys know what I meant, though.
My experience is relatively identical to both of yours. I love the arcade original, and the Saturn version, it plays incredibly faithfully, like you both said, but of course the graphics are rushed because it was technically unfinished. My understanding is Tantalus was the one porting the game, and Sega allegedly told them to just wrap it up as it was, which would explain why it looks the way it does, if that's correct, of course. But again, for home, it plays very faithfully. It follows the original arcade version right down to the roots of every enemy that shows up, where they show up, the paths that you can take. It's all there. It just doesn't look as pretty as it could have.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Chaz there. I'm pretty sure that back in the day, the official Sega Saturn magazine was reporting that Sega did kind of hurry Tantalus up to get the game all finished up. And what had happened is, in my playthroughs anyways, I noticed that some areas look relatively okay and other areas look pretty bad. Like there's some really low-res textures going on. Shockingly bad, in fact. So it turns out that some of those were just placeholder textures that Tantalus was going to ultimately replace with some higher res stuff, and they just never had the chance because they ran out of time. So, there are some areas, like I said, that look okay, they're passable, and other areas that just they do look really rough.
God, it looks so ugly in comparison to the arcade version of it.
The other thing, too, with me was, like, initially, if you play the game on Saturn, you get green blood, so you don't get the original red blood, and you have to, enter a secret code, and then you can activate red blood, and that's just, I guess, indicative of the era that the game was released in, because nowadays, of course, that would not even be remotely an issue. But, yeah, back in the day, unless you enter that secret code, you got green blood going on. There's one more thing I want to mention about the game, and it'll drive anybody who has OCD just up the wall. And it's the fact that on the cover of the North American version, the Sega Saturn lettering is facing the wrong way, and it is literally the only title that has this issue. And it is, yes, no kidding. And actually, what I'm super thankful is that on the spine, it is correctly oriented, so that at least if you got your games on a shelf, it doesn't stand out. But looking at it, whoever let that pass through quality control, they need to be spoken to in a very firm manner, because that's just not acceptable.
Probably the same guy who forgot to put the siding of a stall on there.
Or how about the guy that flipped the Saturn logo upside down on Rayman?
I'm going to be honest. I think that people just didn't care. I mean, it was like one of the last Saturn games released, and it's like, yeah, let's just rush it out the door. No one's going to buy it anyways. The console's dead.
If somebody hadn't said something, I likely never would have noticed that upside-down lettering on the front cover.
Yeah, I have to agree with Chaz on this. I didn't actually notice that until somebody pointed that out to me.
I feel so poorly about that now. I'm sorry, guys.
Thanks.
It's one of those things that just drives me, though.
All right, well, I'm going to go get some razor blades and go fix that issue on my copy. Be right back.
Do what you got to do, man.
Got to cut up a $250 game.
That's another
Oh, I
thing,
thought you were
man.
going to like use them to like razor blade your eyeballs. My bad.
Jeez. Dark, Peter. But I do appreciate your effort for trying to stick with a theme. Speaking of that, if you really want to play it, I think everyone in the chat would recommend just getting a Japanese copy, as it's the US copy is like $250 to $300, and a Japanese copy is a lot less than that. It's probably 10% of that cost, so like $20 to $30 I think nowadays. Probably less if you can get a good auction.
Just my personal opinion on it is a backup or run a Model 2 emulator on your computer.
How are you supposed to play the light gun then?
A mouse. It's a hell of a lot better than a light gun.
Does that work on the emulation?
Oh, God, yes.
Well, sorry guys, podcast over. I gotta go do this. Be right back.
Yeah. Doesn't it use a cursor tracker too?
Yeah,
I didn't
it
know.
does. It does.
Did they have to
Yes.
modify the ROM for that, or was that in the arcade ROM itself?
I mean, the emulator, all the emulator is doing is recognizing the mouse as the on-screen cursor. That's basically all it's recognizing. It's tracking the movement of your weapons. Literally, all the Model 2 emulator does is it tracks your mouse movement the exact same way that the CRT is tracking the movement of the light gun. It's the same. I mean, you have to calibrate every single game. You have to calibrate every single time. It kind of sucks because just by nature of it being an emulator, it's not perfect. Getting some of the games, especially like Virtua Cop and Virtua Cop 2, to actually be in sync is kind of off-putting. But generally speaking, if somebody wants to play House of the Dead 2, play it on an emulator on a PC. Like, seriously, that is your best experience. I know we're all Saturn fanboys, but your best time is going to be playing it on the PC, especially considering the fact that you have endless credits.
Or go buy an arcade machine of it.
I mean, you can do that too.
If you have the room and money for it.
I actually saw a really good deal. I had saw it for $200 locally, but I just didn't have the space to put it anywhere, so I'm still sad I didn't pick that up.
Oh,
Dude,
jeez, that's a loss.
Hey, dude, I turned down a Time Crisis 2 double cab for like $200. So, I mean, I feel your pain.
Sadness. Why don't we move on to our next game, which is, of course, in my opinion, probably one of my favorite games of all time, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So, where do I start with this one? Originally released on the PS1 in October of 1997, and about a year later on the Sega Saturn. Basically, it was Koji Igarashi's love song to Castlevania and Metroid combined together into what probably defined an entire genre called Metroidvanias.
I'll just give everybody my sort of take on, first of all, the game. So I've never played the PlayStation version, but I've played the Saturn version through several times. You know, both through the regular castle as well as the inverted castle. Love the game. I think it's phenomenal. It's relatively English friendly on the Saturn because, of course, it's a Japanese only release. So even if you've never played the English PlayStation version, it's not so bad to follow the Japanese game. I mean, you know, there's the odd cutscene, but it's not too bad. And then also, you know, you have to sort of get around your inventory screens. With some trial and error, it's not so bad, and it's relatively, you know, easy to get to. And so, you know, I know a lot of people say that obviously the PlayStation 1 version is the way to go. It is much superior, and I understand, you know, the technical aspects of why the Saturn port isn't everything that it could and should have been. But that said, if your only experience has been with the Saturn game, it's a great, great title. I absolutely love it. It's super enjoyable. And I especially love the soundtrack by Michiru Yamane. She did a fantastic job. It's like a blend of a whole sort of range of different musical styles. You've got a bit of classical in there, some metal, some techno, and a bunch of others. And, you know, the other thing that sort of surprised me when I played it is the variety that you get in the game. I mean, you've got literally hundreds of different enemies, and they're all super varied. And so, you know, lots of sprite work, and the levels themselves are really well done. Like, it's a really gorgeous game to look at. You know, they did a really good job with it. I totally recommend it.
I actually was able to beat it on the Saturn on my first playthrough, and That being said, I would not recommend it for a first playthrough, just because it requires a little bit of Japanese to know where you're going, especially in the library shop where you buy items and figuring out what all your relics do. It'd be kind of a hassle if you haven't played the PS1 version or know what it says in English. I mean, I know when I played through, I had to use a guide to be able to know what half of the things said and what half the items did. So if you do play it, I would recommend either playing with a guide or, in my opinion, starting on the PS1 version. That being said, though, I think Castlevania is a really slick game and it's really a lot of fun, even with all the technical lagginess added to it.
Yeah, well, Peter covered it pretty well, what he likes about it and what still makes it fun to play despite the obvious technical flaws when it was moved over to the Saturn, because I didn't hear Peter cover this, but the game got ported over by KC Nagoya, who apparently wasn't familiar with the Saturn architecture, and so they cut a few corners and made a few shortcuts or compromises to get the game working on the Saturn, rather than optimizing it to make it play as well as it could have, which is what irks me the most.
Yeah, there's actually notes that they left inside of the game code that actually talks about their issues with the game and developing for it. It's really interesting.
That's cool. I'll have to look at that.
There's like 5 or 6 developers that said, "Hi, my name's this guy, and yeah, we had some issues getting this out, but we're really proud of what we've done, and we really hope you enjoy it." So it's really heartfelt. It's all in Japanese, but I would recommend if you guys go on the Cutting Room Report website, it has a translation of what it says, and it's really cool. I wish there'd be more games like that like gives the developers 101, like a behind the music of making the game.
That's really cool. I'll have to read that when I get a chance. But yeah, despite the issues, whether minor or major, the game was still fun for me. I still had a lot of fun playing it on the Saturn. And I was very familiar with the PS1 version because, like most, that's the one I started with. So having to see the game and experience it in a different light was still a nice change, despite the technical issues that the game had, because I get irked by that because I know it should have been better. You know, a 2D game on a 2D powerhouse of a system that objectively plays worse than on a system that does not do 2D well, which is what irks me the most. But despite all that, I still had a lot of fun with it. You know, completing the maps, completing the bestiary, getting all the rare drops, you know, one chrysogram in each hand, just mowing everything down with 2 of those in my hands.
Yeah, I love going through that game when you're OP and just like wrecking everything.
Oh yeah, it's just such a blast.
What's your go-to items? Like when I played, I think I did the highest one-handed sword, and I used a dagger for those quick attacks and quick ganks.
Yeah, in the beginning of the game, I'd use my knuckles a lot until I would later get the jeweled knuckles, which you can get early per a certain trick, because fighting with your fists is a lot faster than swinging a sword one tap at a time. So that allows me to pop off some hits faster, you know, using a knife early in the game. You know, those quicker hits until I get to near the end of the game and just get a chrysogram in each of my hands. And like I said, I'm a walking lawnmower. Everything I walk into, I just cut it down.
Yeah, I had to admit I cheated a little bit on some of the bosses where I can't remember what the item layout was, but it's the thing where basically you run to the shield and like just cuts down your damage by a ton.
Oh, yeah, that trick. No, I never tried that, but I am aware of the trick where you pull your shield out and put it back while you're backdashing, which apparently cuts down a lot of frames, so it gets you to move across the map faster.
I gotcha. I haven't tried that trick. It's like a special move you can do with an input. It's been a while, so I don't remember, but yeah, if you use that move, it's basically OP heaven.
Yeah, I don't know how many frames you have to do that, but you know, speedrunners have been able to do that consistently with little error.
I definitely am not in that category.
And to close off my input on it, I'm going to quote Koji Igarashi, who is quoted as saying, "I can understand why players would be interested in those other features, but I really, really don't feel good about them. I couldn't put my name on that and present it to Castlevania fans." Those were his words.
For the Saturn version?
Yeah, for the Saturn version. He was not happy about it.
Good thing I didn't have him autograph that. I actually brought that to E3 to get him an autograph, but I never found him, so probably throw it in my face like, what is this garbage?
That's cool he was there.
And despite, you know, how sort of technically inferior the Saturn version is, it does have some exclusive levels and some items and, you know, the ability to play with all the characters right off the hop. So, I mean, you know, they tried, and so I can see the draw, especially if you're a Castlevania fan, to want to have both versions.
They did add some neat stuff. The garden, the dungeon, Maria is now playable. It was playable right up from the get-go. And a funny little trivia, In the PlayStation version, the garden level is still there, but there's nothing more than a glitched out save point if you manage to clip yourself below the floor.
That's once you first start the game and you get underneath that entrance, right?
That's the entrance, yeah. That's that what looks like a manhole or like a basement, like a basement bulkhead cover. That's where the garden is in the Saturn version. You can clip your way in there, but there's nothing more than a glitched save point in the PlayStation version.
Yeah, because I know I know it's open in the beginning of the game, so like if you start up immediately, you can potentially get in there, but Chaz was saying it was a glitched out mess.
So, do you guys know whether the two Saturn exclusive levels, like they were obviously built from the ground up for the Saturn, whether they still feature those sort of stretched out graphics, or whether there's still any sort of artifacts? I mean, there shouldn't be, but I'm curious if they exist. Do you guys happen to know?
I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head, because I do know that the Saturn version's resolution was stretched manually instead of being properly optimized, but those levels don't exist on a functional level in the PlayStation version, so I can't say for certainty if those levels are also stretched manually screen-wise. I mean, if Alucard and the other sprites look the same, then it's likely that the screen is stretched.
Yeah, it probably still has that. The whole game suffers from it, but I think the enemies and things on there, I noticed wasn't lagging as badly as it was with the rest of the game. So I'm hoping that maybe it might be the case that they just optimized it properly.
Yeah, that would be nice, but who knows?
Either way, playing it on any system, it's still a great game.
To be completely honest with you, I have never been the biggest fan of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It's not that it's a bad game. I'm not really big into the whole Metroidvania. I love Metroid Fusion. I love some of the old school Metroids on the Super Nintendo I played over at my buddy's house. But I never really got big into the Castlevania. I never was a really big side scroller guy. I've tried to talk about this a couple of times with like Dave and everybody, and I've made entire posts about it on Facebook. The reason I love the 5th generation so much is because of 3D gaming. 2D gaming for me was just not. It was the Sega Master System. It was the Genesis, the Saturn, and the PlayStation. Just like blew my entire horizon up, and I pretty much just said screw 2D games. I just didn't want anything to do with 2D games for the longest time. I just wanted 3D all the time. The bigger, the sharper, the cleaner, the better.
No, like Sony.
Yeah.
The views of Sam do not reflect Sega Saturn SHIRO's views, and they're all his views alone and not anyone else's.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, there's people who don't like the games I like, and I'm not saying I don't like Symphony of the Night. I don't hold it to the huge praise that everybody else does. It's done some remarkable things for gaming. I mean, the connotation of Metroidvania, I mean, it's right there for you. And I've gone back and I've played them. I will say this, I much prefer the 2D Castlevanias over the 3D attempts in the late 90s, early 2000s. I will say that in a heartbeat. But again, it's not one of them games I've soaked hours and hours and hours into. I will say this, though. Sega Lord X gave it a hell of a damn workout and really gave it some love on one of his videos a while back. And you could just go read the comments section and you will see what the community thinks.
All right. Any last thoughts before we move on?
I have a very limited request list, and that was on it. So I did a limited run of that for a while. Nothing's really changed against our, last year's show. It's one of those that if you want to experience Symphony of the Night, your best place to probably do that is going to be either PlayStation, Xbox Live, any of the numerous compilations that are out there. Playing it on the Saturn version, it never seemed worthwhile to me. Price, if you want to own an original, is just, astronomical. And while I think I wanted to say I gave this thing a 7 or something last year, and it's not to say that the game in and of itself is bad. It's just that there are better options out there if you wanted to experience it.
With that, let's move on to our next game, which is of course D. That's it, D. Game developed by Warp and directed by Keiji Ino. And it was actually first published on the 3DO, and it later came on the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and MS-DOS a year later in '96. And essentially, it's a one-save, one-go game. So you start on disc 1, swap the discs over, and you keep going till you beat the game, and there's no save slots. I guess that sort of was the big concept of it, and they describe it as a deranged mist in a way, where I guess you're in this hospital, or you're in this area, and you just gotta figure out how to escape it. I was a bit confused myself on the gameplay, I'm going to be honest. I started off and I didn't know much to do with it, so I'm not that great of it, but Maybe you guys know a little bit more than I do and could give me some of the 411 on that.
D is a psychological horror 2-hour experience in the form of, it's a 2-hour movie that's interactive, and it's a horror movie. And that's what it is. That's what D is. It's literally, you've got 2 hours, do this, or you fail. And
it's very high concept.
The whole concept behind that is so simplistic and would piss almost anybody off in that period of time. Because, I mean, even to this day, you got to sit down and play it. You just got to sit down and play it. There is no stopping. I absolutely love it, and I absolutely hate it, if that tells you anything. If I can get through it and no issues, no wrong turns, no bad decisions, because, I mean, you've got you've got hints that you can have. It's something you just need to play. If you got a pseudo Saturn cart, burn it. If you got an emulator, play it. If you've got, a Phantom Universal or any other mod chip, burn a copy and just put it in there, turn the lights out, and play it.
It's a really interesting game. I tried playing it. I never really could get the hang of it, but to be honest, I didn't spend a lot of time playing it. I just sort of wandered around and got lost. It seems like something I need to put a lot more time in to be able to get good. It's actually pretty sad, though, that Keiji Ino, who passed away in 13, didn't really do much beyond D after that. He did some high-concept games. I mean, after D2, he sort of dropped off and worked with another company, so he didn't really create much more, which is kind of a bummer.
Rest in peace, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, he did one game on the Wii, Yumi and Cubes, and a couple contract games to the iPhone and stuff, but beyond that, it's kind of sad, though. I would have loved to see more high-concept games like this. If he would have lived today and he would have worked on something, especially in this Kickstarter era, I would love to get a D3 or get some sort of psychological horror game like that. It's just really interesting to me. What do you guys feel?
Yeah, I have a lot of good feelings about it.
What are those feelings that are
Well,
good?
how about I explain those feelings?
No. Go for
No,
it.
I won't. Yeah, I remember seeing ads for D way back in the heyday when it was a new thing, when it was a big deal. I remember seeing screenshots of it, and I'm like, ooh, that looks like a fun, scary game. But when I was a kid, I never got around to it until the Saturn version all these years later when I ran it for us SHIROs and our fans. And as I expected, it was an interactive movie the movie that would only play out when I made the right decisions. And I put myself in the time frame of when it first came out playing it. I asked myself, what kind of expectations should I have for this game? What did this game accomplish back then? How would I feel about it today? And I felt really positive about it for the most part, for what it was trying to do and what it aimed to do. To be innovative, to keep you guessing, puzzle design, pushing the movie aspects of a video game. Trying to really get the most you can out of rendering a movie. I think, if I remember correctly, the movies were rendered with Amiga 32 computers. Did I get that right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so.
That's crazy.
And it was also, I believe the first version was the 3DO version. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mentioned that it came out first on the 3DO.
It was Amiga.
Yeah, in fact, in Japan, it actually gave the 3DO some brief momentum. Like, it garnered more of an interest of the public when that game came out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for myself, I wasn't able to finish it live as I was new to the game before, and I didn't know that the puzzle answer for that safe was 78, because apparently I was probably supposed to see the number in a cutscene, but I missed it. I mean, now that I know the solution, it'll be a walk in the park, but unfortunately that's likely what cost me the majority of my time, which is why I didn't finish the 2-hour limit. So I definitely got to go back and finish it and see the ending for myself, because like how Sam has been talking about it, I'm sure it's worth it, right, Sam?
Dude, okay, I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil the story of the game.
That's all right.
But, if you there's one key thing you have to do through because it's a movie. If you don't play it out like it's supposed to, like you just said, it's not going to work. If you miss one thing and you manage to get to the end and you come across Laura's father, Dr. Harris, you are going to have a very bad time. You're going to have a very bad time, or he's going to have a very bad time. And it's all based on one item that if you do not find it, you can continue on with the story if you don't find it. But if you don't find it, it's bad times. If you find it, it's bad times for him. And that's what's cool about it. The movie will be over either way. I mean, there's really two endings. There's two final endings to the game. There is the good ending, and then there's the bad ending. getting into the nitty gritty of the background story, it's a really screwed up game. It's a screwed up story, and it's awesome.
Do we have any final thoughts before we move on?
I'm just going to chime in for a second. I know it's a 2-disc set on Saturn, and like some Saturn games that were multi-disc games in North America would have come out with, those soft cardboard sort of slips, and then others came with, the hard second tray that would click into the North American Saturn jewel case. And D was one of those games that had the sort of hard second disc tray. And I lost mine. And it is super frustrating because even with the replacement cases that are coming out now from limited run games, as well as the other ones there, nobody's producing that second insert tray. And so trying to find one of those has been a nightmare. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking for a complete copy. It doesn't come with the soft sort of insert CD holders. It does have that hard tray.
One thing, Peter, Command & Conquer is another North American release that had the exact same thing. So if you, by some chance, cannot find a complete copy of D, whereas it's a very expensive game, Command & Conquer is generally a cheaper game. And if you can find a complete copy of that has its tray, vis-a-vis, you can swap them out.
So how much did it jump up, D?
How much is D? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, how much? Because last time I checked, it was like around 40-ish.
I might have just seen somebody asking that much, but I could have swore I saw somebody had a sale for $80 on a Facebook group just a couple of days ago.
Wow.
If that version's 80, then what does the PlayStation version sell for?
No, I mean, I'm showing eBay auctions right now, complete with $32.95 buy it nows.
Oh, well, never mind. I mean, in that case, both of them are cheap. Command & Conquer is only 40 most of the time?
I know that there were multiple games that came out with those trays. Like Command & Conquer is definitely one. So is Creature Shock. One of the Digital Pictures releases had them. And I mean, so did Mr. Bones. So Pat, if you ever pick up a copy of Mr. Bones, once you're done throwing the discs into the trash, if you could send me that extra tray, I would be super grateful.
What I would do to correct you, I would stomp on the case directly so I can smash both the case and the discs at the exact same time. But now that I know you're looking for it, I will make sure to take the tray out, carefully place it next to it, put the discs raw in there, and just stomp away. So no need to worry, Peter. I got you covered.
I'm going to stop the cast.
Through of Anime Stream with Pat and guest, we're going to be watching him play Mr. Bones until he beats it.
That sounds like a torture beyond that of man.
It is a Halloween-themed show.
It's horrific, not in the ways that you intend it to be. I'm gonna break Mr. Bones my foot.
I had that extra tray as well.
There's a lot of games that have that extra tray.
I would say that it would be if they could come up with a better solution, even if it's such a small handful of games that utilize that. If you could imagine any of the 4-disc games that no one wants to produce those cardboard sleeves for, or at least at a reasonable price. If they could adapt those 2-disc trays to become 4-disc trays, right? There's enough double or multiple disc games out there that would be worthwhile, I think.
Dude, I would love just to have a reproduction case for Panzer Dragoon and to have somebody make me a reproduction of disc 2 and 4.
Oddly specific.
Because I have disc 1 and disc 3.
Oh, but you want one with the art that matches, right? Yeah,
I want one that's literally would pass for real. Seriously.
That's a bit dicey.
It's just for me. It's for me. I'm not going to fill it.
Well, what about if you're dying? It gets back in the wild. I don't know, man. You live life pretty wild and crazy.
I mean, I do. I ain't even going to lie. But I mean, just for me, I would want it to look near perfect. I got 2 discs plus 30 other games for $80 back in 2012. So I was like, yo.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our last game, and that is Deep Fear. So Deep Fear was Sega's response to Resident Evil. Resident Evil came out, and it was just a massive success. So, of course, Sega figured they had to do something right along those lines. So it came out in Japan initially, and then it made its way over to Europe, and it was the very last official Saturn release over in Europe. And they were working on a build for the North American market, but by then the sun had set on the North American market, and that game was never released. However, fast forward to several years past that, and we had the Lost and Found series of unofficial, releases / compilations that came out. And the third Lost and Found volume actually contained the North American complete version of Deep Fear on it. I believe it was in a headers that you could differentiate that it was a North American release. And if that's not correct, then somebody please by all means jump in and correct me on that. But this is the full NTSC release. It's fully translated. It's perfectly playable and ready to go. The save file system works just fine, so it's out there if you know how to find it. Burn a copy and play it. So let's jump in and get to some folks' thoughts. Anybody, give this game a go back in the day?
Not back in the day, but it was one of the first games I played when I first got my Saturn, burned, of course. I played it a little bit. I believe it was the North American burner that did. I didn't run into any issues with it, any of the 50 hertz things, but I had a bit of a hard, tricky time playing it. The copy I had kept freezing up constantly, so I was running into many issues and I didn't really get that far into it. But what I played from it was really fun, and I don't know what's with the sea and deep inside of it being very, very scary, but for some reason it just kind of freaked me out a bit. So did anybody else feel that same way, that it was a little bit creepier?
I absolutely love Deep Fear. It is perfectly what Resident Evil 2 should have been, at least in regards to gameplay mechanics. Like just the simple fact you can move and shoot. And no, I was not one of them people that managed to import a copy from, Europe or Japan or anything like that. It's, I was like you, it was the mid-2000s before I had a chance to play it. But I read about it in Game Informer, like 1999 or 1990. It had to have been 1998 because it would have had to have been while, the Sega Saturn was still relevant. But at some point, it seemed like it was coming over here. At least that's what I was reading into. And, it never came. So going at it in the mid-2000s after Resident Evil 4 had come on, we had, the Silent Hills had already rolled out. There was all these other, horror games. To have something that was like a Resident Evil throwback and just completely, this ain't even B-rated acting. This is C or D level. And it's just the idiocracy of it. Like, I don't know what your demographic is up on this cast, but you just got all these flamboyant characters. And it's just like, oh my God, dude, I'll laugh my ass through it. But at the exact same time, it really does have it's got some awesome horror tropes to it. It's got some very cliche kind of things going on with it. Anybody who's ever played the game, you find out, oh, this is all your fault. Why? And it's just, it's so screwed up. It's so janky and wanky. It's got numerous mechanical issues. Don't get me wrong. The game has mechanical issues out the yin yang, but generally speaking, I think it's a really fun game to get into. You've got to come at it not thinking it's a Resident Evil clone. I thought for the longest time it was a Resident Evil clone. And in some respects it is. But it goes on these tangents so much different than Resident Evil does. You got your oxygen supply. You've got the ability to move while you shoot. You've got numerous points throughout the game where you basically have access to God knows how much. You have the oxygen grenades. It's so out of the ordinary, but at the same time, it's very much in line with that idea of, over the shoulder, fixed camera angle, survival horror of the late 90s. I don't know. I so wish it'd come to the States. I really do, because I would have probably jumped on it in a heartbeat, considering how much I love survival horror at that point.
I did find it really interesting how diverse Sega was at this time, though. Look at all the games that came out within that time frame, that are so differential. They had some teams working on Nights in the Dreams, had some teams working on House of the Dead, working on Deep Fear, and yeah, it wasn't all the main AM teams, but it was all different Sega departments. And I always thought that was pretty interesting and something that I never seen Nintendo do, and like go all over with ratings, like from like hard M to a kitty E.
Dude, Sega of the 90s was awesome, dude. Sega of America is what screwed everybody over.
Yeah, at the end there at 1997's E3, I know that they instituted what they called a 5-star gaming policy. A game that didn't arbitrarily meet their sort of 5-star quality control would be, just wouldn't get released. And it makes me wonder how many amazing, titles just never saw the light of day over here because of that stupid policy.
Probably a lot of them, especially the RPGs, because Bernie Stolar didn't see any value in them.
Bernie Stolar's the devil there, Jimmy.
Yeah, Bernie's fired.
I mean, eventually, but a little bit too late on that one. Just when he was actually getting good at his job.
Stolar is not our future.
Thank you, Chaz, Jesus.
But yeah, it is a bummer to imagine what games could have been in the US. All we can do now is hope on those fan translations and play what we have.
But I mean, honestly, though, whenever it comes to Deep Fear, the only way that you're going to play that game legitimately is through a Japanese or a European copy. The PAL copy goes for what, like almost on par with like half of the going rate for a European Panzer Dragoon Saga. I mean, it's like £200 at least, 200 euros, like something like that.
Around $500. What I've seen, but to be honest, I never see it for sale that often.
I mean, it isn't. It was very limited release even there, to my understanding. But my point is that the game itself was originally supposed to come out in the States. I mean, what you're talking about with the header, to understand. I mean, the only difference between the PAL version and the American version is the refresh rate. It's the refresh rate and what it's optimized for. PAL version is 50 hertz, US version is 60. We've got a bigger screen. In some respects, we have a slimmer screen. I don't know. I'm not that technical in it. But I mean, it's the exact same game, dude. It's the exact same game.
We're never the same color.
Yeah, something like that.
Dang it, Chaz. I wasn't about to make that joke.
Yeah, I beat you to it.
But my point is that the North American NTSC-U version of the game does exist. And there's no legal way to buy it. So burn it.
He means burn to play it. Don't set it on fire, please.
I mean, you can do that too. 12 gallons of diesel solve any problem.
Sega Saturn SHIRO accepts no responsibility for any fires caused by Sam's methods of burning games.
If you put 12 gallons of diesel inside your Saturn, I promise you it's going to be fire real quick. Like, it's probably going to burn your house down, call the fire, call the law, call everybody else, but you ain't going to be playing no games.
Whew. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this one last year also. And this was on my list of games to dump for Redump Project. I've had an interesting little find since then. So as Peter mentioned, this was originally released part of the third volume of Lost and Found. And that volume made its debut and sold out here actually at what eventually became PRGE. It was like the Northwest Computer Gaming Expo or something along those lines. And I completely missed it when it was for sale that year, but I ended up picking up my copy from eBay, and I don't know where it is at this exact moment, but it doesn't matter so much because the second disc of my 3-disc set, so disc 2 for Deep Fear, has no data. Older games actually forgot to burn the data on my disc.
Wow.
Man,
how does that even happen?
I feel for you, brother.
Poor quality control.
So what is the story behind the Lost and Found, if you have time to share that?
Well, I don't have too much information about them themselves. I do know that the website, the domain name that was associated with them ended up getting purchased, and the new owners of that have nothing to do with those releases. So I may never find, that person. John Hancock, who's a major collector out here, and a good friend of mine, he actually also has a copy, and he's going to let me dump his version. And when that happens, I'm debating as to whether or not to keep mine unused with no data on it just because it's such an oddity, or to actually burn the data onto that disc. Haven't really decided yet.
You should swap out yours with John's. I don't see anything going wrong with that.
Yeah, no way. They're all hand numbered, so.
To be fair, though, I think if you burnt it, I don't think it's going to affect the value whatsoever. Especially since it's already a burnt disc. Was it a CER in the first place, right?
Oh yeah, it's a CDR with a cheesy paper label on it. And it's
I
not like
gotcha.
it's anything amazing. It's just more of an oddity. Out of all the stuff that Satakore lists, right, that on Madrom's site, this one is one that he counts in the collection and listed as ultra rare. And I think there's like 50 copies or less, of this particular game out there, or well, this particular packaging. But in the end, it really is just a burnt disc, blue bottom disc with a paper label on it that's been hand numbered, put into a white DVD case with a cardboard insert saying, "Please don't pirate this game."
Hilarious.
Yeah, it is really kind of funny, and I'm hoping to have it with me, PRGE. But Sam did make a couple of mentions. There are only 3 files that are different when the analysis was done. The first .bin, or the boot file, was what sets it as optimized for 60 hertz. The item.txt is a list of items, and it doesn't exist on the European version. And then there's a slight bit of extra data, one of the sound files, or one of the files in the sound subdirectory. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. And so, yeah, I mean, all this information, you can always go to satakore.com, look up found, and you'll find, this information about it.
I gotcha.
This being our second annual Halloween episode, we kind of knew what to expect for the major games, and how we went about choosing the games to talk about this time around was just having everyone who's going to be on the cast throw a vote of their top 5 horror or Halloween-based themed games. And while going through the list, some of the ones that we've talked about already tonight were the major hitters. Your Resident Evil, your House of the Dead, Castlevania. So these are to be expected. What struck me personally as hilariously interesting was some of Peter's choices. So Peter, would you go ahead and talk about your choices here that did not make our main cut?
Okay, yeah, so there's definitely a couple of games that I put forward that I thought had a good Halloween/horror theme. And the first game on that list is Swagman. So Swagman was programmed by Core and published by Eidos, and it actually only got a Saturn release in Europe, so it never came out over here. But it is not PAL optimized, so if you have a means to get a hold of the game and play it here, you're going to get, the full experience. You're not going to have, lost graphics or anything like that. And so the game is about 2 kids, Zach and Hannah, and they're stuck in their house and trying to fight off the evil Swagman. And I know that maybe the name Swagman doesn't exactly inspire fear, but, there it is. It's a very evil-looking character, really sharp teeth, and he's trying to attack them in their dreams. And so they've got to sort of work their way through their house while they're dreaming. And then there's also sections where they jump into a dream world, and so they transform into these, monsters, and then they can fight using, claws, and they have a fire breath and all these other interesting attacks. But the premise of the game is that they're fighting through all of this while they're asleep. And so, your life meter, so to speak, is just how many Z's you currently have, to indicate that you're asleep. And as you take hits and whatever, you're running out of Z's. And so as you completely run out of Z's, you wake up. And so you're trying to find more Z's, and you can find Z's by essentially running over people that are actually sleeping as well. So if you find your parents' bedroom, they're sleeping together, just sleeping, and you can pick up their Z's, and then, later you can find your cat, and he's sleeping, and so you can pick up his Z's. Anyways, the game really reminds me of Zombies Ate My Neighbors. It's that sort of gameplay. So it's an overhead 2D sort of explore the house type of game. But the music is really sort of creepy and spooky, and there's a lot of sort of horror/Halloweeny themes throughout the game. So, the part that I'm at right now in the game, I've just defeated the evil pumpkin boss, where it's this big giant pumpkin head, and he's got 2 sort of viney, clawy arms, and he's trying to grab you and throw fire at you and all this stuff, and you have to defeat him and proceed. And so, there's the overgrown garden you have to fight through, and you get to the basement, and you have to collect bugs. So it's really sort of a very Halloween-y type of game. So I really recommend it. It took me by surprise. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying it. And like I said, it's not optimized for PAL displays, so it'll display just fine, on our TV sets. So I absolutely recommend it. It is available in North America on the PlayStation 1, but since we don't care about PlayStation, it's definitely good to call out that the European Saturn game is fully playable in 60 hertz, and there's no issues with it whatsoever. It's definitely a game that harkens back to the time that it was released in. Like some games end up being completely timeless, and whether you pick them up and play them today or you pick them up and played them 20 years ago, you still get that awesome experience. This is definitely a game that you've got to put yourself in that 1997 mindset to really enjoy it. But once you get there and you're in that right mindset, it really is a blast. I'm having a ton of fun with it right now for sure. So
a quick tidbit on this too. Both this and Deep Fear are part of my PAL game collection. When I started going after my personal collection goal, the Saturn, was to own one of every officially released game in English, and then in, if there wasn't released in English, then to get it in whatever languages I could. So that would mean, Deep Fear had to come from the European realm. And Swagman was actually one of those games that cost me quite a pretty penny. And then I forgot that. I don't know how that, possibly could have happened. But I forgot I owned it, and I got a second copy. And then one day I was, sorting my game collection, and I found I actually had 3 of them. The demo, which I had failed to realize I had, and then 2 copies of the hardbox case for that.
You literally have swag.
Well, not anymore. I think I either sold or have one of my copies of Swagman for sale at PRGE this year. But in any case, both Swagman and Deep Fear being released in English, I had to get them in whatever means.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and I happened to, back in the day, I picked up the demo of the European Swagman, and it's only just recently that I've sort of given it a spin, and once I completed the demo, I thought, you know what, this is pretty fun. I want to invest the time in this game, and that's sort of what got me into earning the complete game to play through. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the second game that I listed that has a bit of a Halloween theme, and that is Rainbow Islands. Now, Rainbow Islands is a late 80s Taito release, and it was featured on a 2-game compilation that Acclaim released in North America called Bubble Bobble, also featuring Rainbow Islands. It's sort of weird how they sort of titled it Bubble Bobble and then just kind of added that, it also features Rainbow Islands, because I love Rainbow Islands. I think it's super addictive. It's an amazing little game. So there's actually 2 versions of Rainbow Islands on that game disc, the original, or else, I guess I should say a facsimile of the original, as straight a port as could be had, and then also a version of Rainbow Islands Enhanced. And that is essentially the exact same game, but it's been reskinned with slightly more modern graphics, so like an expanded color palette, and so on. It's not made to look fully rendered or, awesome cutting edge 32-bit anything. It's just sort of a nicer, smoother, more colorful version of the late 80s original. So it ends up looking really nice. And by virtue of that, it even looks really nice today. Like, it's aged really well. Anyways, the third level, the third island that you visit when playing Rainbow Islands is called Monster Island. And the entire world, which is 4 levels, is fully Halloween themed. So, you get to fight little zombies and, bats that turn into Draculas that shoot lightning at you. And, that's the level in the game where the difficulty really kind of picks up. So you end up really switching over from trying to collect items for points and those little crystals to just trying to survive and using your rainbows to try to advance and, get to the top of the screen. And it's, I mentioned this game because it's insanely fun. It is super addictive, and it's not really a game that a whole lot of Saturn players would necessarily associate with the console. It's out there, and I definitely encourage everybody to give it a go. And that little monster world, the Halloween-themed world, is super fun, and it's totally thematic, and it's very cutesy. It's certainly not realistic, so, it looks great, and it plays fantastic. So, yeah, definitely a game that is worth calling out for Halloween. And I'm curious if any of you guys have any experience with Rainbow Islands.
No, unfortunately, I never even heard of this game, but now I'm kind of interested.
That's what I'm saying. Just about everything you talked about, I've never even heard about it. Or if I have, like Swag Man, it was not in the context of the Sega Saturn game.
You'd like it. It's a lot of fun.
I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah, it's an easy pick-up-and-play two-player arcade-style scoring game.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's one of those games that's super easy to pick up and play, but boy, are there ever layers and layers of depth in terms of, how you progress, how you can attack, permanent power-ups that you can get if you cleverly collect things in a certain order. So, and even the scoring system is sort of cumulative in a certain clever way. So just lots of depth in what initially seemed like, super pick-up, quick arcade type game. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely depth there for sure. All right, I will move on to the third game that I listed, and that is Midnight Love with River Alligator Takeshi-san. So this is a totally obscure Saturn title that I actually wrote about in one of my articles, and really the main reason that it's as obscure as it is that I completely made it up. It doesn't exist. But most of you wouldn't have necessarily immediately picked up on that because there's a lot of really weird and obscure stuff over in Japan. So yeah, that's it. There's no Midnight Love with River Alligator Takeshi-san available, and I'm really sorry if I got your hopes up. But yeah, it doesn't exist.
Are you serious right now? I spent like weeks trying to search for that game. You know me in anime dating games, Peter. I'm thoroughly disappointed.
Well, you inspired me. I mean, when you were talking about that one racing game where you were, trying to date various girls and then go on races with them, that totally inspired me, Pat. So thank you for that.
On a slightly reverse note, I did play some Rainbow Islands back in the day, and I actually did like it. It's so different from Bubble Bobble, but it is actually a sequel, officially, to Bubble Bobble. So it was kind of interesting, and it's easy enough, colorful enough that my kid could play it, and I enjoyed it for that. The last of our little quick mentions, which are turning out to be not so quick, is one that I've had in my collection for a while. It has the distinction of being, as far as I know, the only 8-disc Saturn game released, and it is called Phantasm. It only came out in Japan. Most everything should be able to be played with its interface and such, with only minor Japanese knowledge. However you want anything about the story, you might as well just play the US version. I hit this myself probably about 3 years ago. Finally obtained a copy, and it's been on my to playlist forever. But this year I picked up a guide, so I'm going to take an attempt at playing through this game, the Japanese version, without looking at any spoilers, because I never played it on the PC or anything else like that.
How playable was it in Japanese? Was there any English voice acting? Did they keep that all in?
No, I think they redubbed all the voice acting and story into Japanese.
So it's going to be a fun time.
I have not played it yet, so I'm kind of looking forward to it in a way.
Yeah, keep us in the loop. I'd definitely like to see how much you struggle with that, because I guarantee you're probably going to do that a lot.
That leads us to our Saturn Obscura of the evening, and Peter takes the cake with this one.
Yeah, so one game that I've spent a lot of time with is Cotton 2 Magical Night Dreams. And again, it's super Halloween themed and doesn't really get a lot of mention. It was a Japan. Sorry, guys.
Japanese game.
British there, mate.
Jeez.
Got a little spotted sea and crumpets with the queen, yeah?
I'd like to play the Japanese game, please.
I'll see you down at Scotland Yard, mate.
So, yes, this was a Japanese-only release. It was developed by Success, and they actually used the Titan arcade board to first release it in arcades. And it very swiftly was ported over to the Saturn, and with it being a Titan arcade game, that, of course, guaranteed a virtually flawless translation to the Saturn. And, this is a total 2D sprite fest, loads and loads of sprites on screen, very sort of fast and furious side-scrolling shooter action. And I mean, you're a witch on a broom, so if that doesn't scream Halloween, I'm not sure what does. And the level's got like an underground lava land, and then you've got, an enchanted forest. You're flying through abandoned castles, and, all the enemies are either skulls or fairies or lots and lots of pumpkin heads. So it's absolutely really great Halloween-themed shooter if you want to try one of those out for Halloween. So there isn't really much of a language barrier with this game. I mean, it's a shooter after all. There is a little bit of a story to it, which is completely, you can't understand it unless you speak Japanese, but I took the liberty of seeing if I could translate it a little bit, and, it's a very weird story. So the story is that of a little witch called Cotton, and she's a preteen little girl, and she loves eating willow candies. And so she's flying around one day, and she finds a willow candy in the forest, and it's not like one she's ever seen before, and so she eats it up. Anyways, as it turns out at the end of the game, that particular willow candy that she found was an artifact that was kept in the castle in the Pumpkin Kingdom, and because she ate it, the Pumpkin Kingdom now has lost its protection against monsters, which is why she had to sort of fight through all the different levels full of monsters. And so the ending sort of ends up being that with her having eaten that willow candy, over time, the land falls into darkness and despair. So it's a really sort of weird and odd, only in Japan sort of storyline. But the game itself is gorgeous. The play mechanics are super fantastic. It's 100% Halloween themed and lots of sprites. And it's just a great game to pick up and play. I had a lot of fun with this one. What about you guys? Did anybody give Cotton 2 a go?
I actually played what I thought was Cotton 2 at a arcade event called ZapCon in Arizona a couple of years ago. I think it was 15. And I thought I was playing was Cotton 2, but it was actually Cotton Boomerang, which is the remixed graphics and gameplay from the previous game. So that's the first experience I had with it. And I eventually played Cotton 2, and I realized it was not the same game because you couldn't select your characters. And I really loved the game. I actually bring it to Game On Expo in Arizona when I did the Saturn games, and there was a lot of positive reception from that game. It was like a really cute game. I really enjoyed it, and probably one of my favorite Saturn shmups.
That must really look good on a PVM, huh?
Yeah, it looks fantastic. It just those scan lines are woo-wee, very schmexy. But yeah, I really enjoyed the game, and I think it's also a fun multiplayer game, especially when you can throw your friend at the enemies. And that's another mechanic I loved was the throwing mechanic. So you could throw almost everything. Like you can throw enemies at enemies. You could throw fireballs. It's just insane how diverse and different you can play that gameplay, and especially the mechanics with the different elements. So you can have wind, fire, ice.
You know what? And that's one thing that really kind of stuck out for me is, I mean, being a shooter, I didn't really bother, even opening the game manual or reading about it online before I played it. And I kind of noticed as I was playing it, wow, like there's a lot of different things you can do. Like obviously, you have your standard shots, but then you can capture enemies and seal them like in your magic, and then you can throw them at enemies, like you were saying, Pat. And there's just a ton of depth to it. And so actually just the other day, I was looking through the Japanese manual for this game, and what I noticed that they did is, which is a mixture of several different sort of syllabaries, and what they did is they wrote it all in extremely simple language. So I should be able to have a crack at translating that manual, and I don't think that I'll have too tough of a time. So it'll be interesting to see, once I'm able to translate that manual, what else I'll discover, because it's a pretty interesting amount of depth that this game has had, and that I didn't expect that, so it was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised in the depth of the gameplay of that, and that's really why I love it the most. It's just a lot of fun, especially I actually didn't know you could pick up the crystals and throw that too, and bounce it back. The hell was it the tea time? I didn't know that.
Right. Like, you can get so many chains and combos going. Like, it ends up being it's got a lot of depth to it, and it's just a ton of fun.
Definitely. I would definitely recommend it. You know what? I don't normally say this, but I think it's probably worth the price that it's asking, like $120. This is the last time I was able to see the price, and I definitely think it's worth it if you want to buy it.
Yeah, it's definitely not one of the cheaper Japanese releases. Neither is the sequel Cotton Boomerang, but these are the games that really sort of show what the Saturn was capable of doing. They're tons of fun. They're super competent arcade translations, and they look fabulous in today's day and age. They've aged super, super well.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to give a special thanks to Peter for helping me out with my playthrough when I played it live. Thanks again. I really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, hey, my pleasure.
Have you played that before the stream?
Before the stream, yeah. In fact, I owned it before the SHIRO concept got started, and it's pretty much already been said. It's a solid design. It's fun to play, and it's got a quirky combo system that works. It's just it's a good time. It's a good time on the Saturn. I can't complain about it.
Do you also throw your friends into enemies when you do co-op?
No, I can't really lift them up.
Yeah, so there's definitely lots of articles that are going to be coming out in the next little while. I've sort of settled into, it's almost like a 3-week interval between articles. Dropping just before Halloween is going to be Skeleton Warriors, which is an interesting, side-scrolling 2D beat-em-up game. Another sort of title that doesn't get a lot of attention on the Saturn. And then I am also going to be dropping an article on Cotton 2, and there's going to be a lot of sort of in-depth explanations about all the different moves that you can pull off in the game, because, unless you can read Japanese, it's really tough to make it out from the manual. And lastly, in the not-too-distant future, I've got a Sonic R article cooking, and I know that that's everybody's favorite polarizing game, so, it'll be a very interesting look at that game. So those are just 3 of the articles that are coming out in the relatively near future.
I'd like to announce right after we finish up Magic Knight Rayearth, we are going to be jumping into Police Knots. I kind of waited until I got the mouse ready, but I kind of wanted to go through that game, especially with the Sega Saturn mouse, and I was testing it out a little bit and getting the feel for it. Because one of the issues is that with my new setup, I don't have access to my PVM as easily as I used to, so Lycan games were kind of a toughie. But with Saturn mouse, it's going to make it like 100% easier to be able to play games like Police Knots, where I don't have to aim the controller and throw it against the wall because my finger isn't fast enough to target the enemies. So that's going to be a blast. I'm really excited to play that. So yeah, look forward to Police Knots coming after we finish up Magic Knight Rayearth. Yeah, we're having a great time. We're almost done, I hope. To be honest, I don't know. I've never played the game before, so for all I know, we could probably only be 20% in, which would be kind of scary if that's the case, because this is really feeling long.
And on that note, you're going to see a change to our stream structure with the beginning of Anime Stream 2.0, Police Knots. We will be switching from our traditional Facebook posts, most of our streaming, over to a Twitch channel. So be looking forward to that in the coming weeks/months. And we're making that transition slowly, testing out our equipment, making sure everybody's ready to go with that. One other thing that's happening, by the time this cast drops, supposedly we will be in the swing of PRGE, so Berlin Retro Gaming Expo. And Ben is flying out there. I'll be manning a booth, as well as having a team running the Xbox LAN party section right next to the Tetris World Championships. So come on by, say hello. Ben flying out there decided to try and do a challenge while we're at the show. We are going to be looking for the weirdest game that he and I can find each for $20 or less, as well as the best game, $20 and under. And we'll also be going around taking video or photos of Saturn Holy Grail items, kind of like a scavenger hunt. The coolest, weirdest, or most obscure, rarest, most expensive Sega Saturn stuff we can find at the expo this year.
I thought that sounded really fun. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with. Maybe we should have like an ultra hard mode where one of you buys the most expensive Saturn game.
Yeah, somehow I don't think that's going to be possible.
Yeah. I imagine they're probably going to have really rare Saturn games there, though. I mean,
you'll always find like a Panzer Dragoon Saga, lying around, and occasionally you'll find Tarmaru, but you won't find, gosh, what's a good example? Eiffel Home. Delasoba Deluxe. Actually, heartbroken to say this, but last year Don had Eiffel Home. He let me dump the game while I was on site with him at PRGE last year, but he had Eiffel Home available. And I think he actually might have had Delasoba Deluxe as well. He did a trade with someone to get... Oh, no, yeah, he did a trade with Drew and got those games Drew ended up getting a couple of those unreleased Saturn protos. Any case, yeah, we're gonna expand this to the rest of the SHIRO team after PRGE. Just kind of have a little fun with it in the light of some other videos that we've seen.
Alright, so I'd like to thank you all for joining us for the extra spooky Halloween cast. We'd like to thank the fans for sticking with us for all this time, and can't believe the fact we're actually having a second Halloween cast. It's just amazing how far we've come. And I know we did the same thing with the last cast, but it just really hit me myself. Like I said, I want to thank all our fans, everyone that listens, everyone that doesn't listen. You guys are awesome too. Just need to discover us first. And yeah, we wish you a good night and good fight.
Peace out. A-Town down, baby.
Oh, also, remember, you must play Sega Saturn.
You must, or we'll find you.
Wow.
I'm not cutting it.